Hi everyone, and welcome to Fairytales and Legends. Today I'm going to tell you the legend of Nils Dacke, a local folk hero from the region where I live. Many words can be used to describe Dacke: leader, freedom fighter, hero. But there are also words such as murderer, traitor, rebel. But most of all, he was a farmer who opposed the king, and this is his story. Nils Dacke was born somewhere around 1510, and near Vissefjärda, located in the region, or as we call it, landscape of Småland. Probably in Södra Lindön. It's here on the map. Nothing is actually known about his upbringing, but we know that he was married and had a son. And his son was probably born somewhere around 1532. We also know that he was a farmer and a Catholic. In 1536, Dacke and an accomplice named Jon Andersson killed the sheriff Inge Arvidsson because of a conflict between the sheriff and Dacke's uncle, Olof Dacke. For this, Dacke got sentenced to death, but the sentence got turned into a fine consisting of 12 oxen. And that was a lot back then. About $2,000. Not dollars, but dollar. It was the biggest coin back then. And a lot of money. However, after the murder, Dacke had to leave his farm and settle down in a croft near the border to the landscape of Blekinge, which back then was a part of Denmark. During this time, Sweden was ruled by the king Gustav Vasa. Dacke, like many others in Småland, didn't like Vasa very much, for many reasons. Among the reasons were raised taxes, limitations in daily life, including what clothes to wear, and the transformation of the church into Protestantism. The people in Småland didn't like these changes at all and wanted to go back to the old ways. But what ticked the people most was when Vasa confiscated all the church's silver, which had cost the farmers tons of money. You can imagine. Well, Dacke, he was a very charismatic man and a natural-born leader. So he had no problems with convincing the other farmers into starting a revolution against King Vasa. And in June 1542, the rebellion that would be known as the Dacke War started. Around midsummer, Dacke and his men attacked the king's sheriffs around the city of Kalmar, and they burned the noble farms, and some of the victims were tied naked to the trees and used for target practice with crossbows and bow and arrow. In the beginning of the uprising, everything went well for Dacke and his men. 2 of the king's armies were driven out of Småland, and the rebellion spread, and soon farmers from southern parts of the landscape Östergötland and parts of the landscape Västergötland were involved in the rebellion. King Vasa had to hire mercenaries from abroad, including Germany, to quell the rebellion. But alas, that wasn't enough. And November 8th, 1542, King Vasa had to sign a treaty of ceasefire, and Dacke was recognized as chief of Småland. And that Christmas, Dacke and his men were celebrating at the castle of Kronoberg. Dacke did his best to bring back the Catholic Church and establish trading connections with Denmark. Vasa, on the other hand, were planning for revenge, and in spring of 1543, his armies, divided into 2 fronts, successfully attacked the farmers of Småland, and Vasa's victory was devastating to the rebellion. Legend has it that during the decisive battle, Dacke got severely injured when he got both of his legs pierced by arrows. Some of his men managed to bring him to safety, and he was kept hidden in a cave near the city of Virserum for 2 months. And during this time, farmers got more and more desperate and started to turn against Dacke. Dacke's legs eventually healed, and he moved away from Virserum and made it back to his home areas. Here he was finally betrayed by one of his closest men, a man by the name Per Skrivare, and in early August 1543, Nils Dacke was shot down on Olatorpets meadow near Torsås in the southeast of Småland. His dead body was brought to Kalmar, where he was pulled apart and displayed. His head was crowned with a copper crown and put on a pole at the gallows hill. But it wasn't over there. His wife, his brothers-in-law, and other relatives to Nils Dacke were also eventually executed. His son, however, was said to be brought to Stockholm, where he was jailed. They say he starved to death in his cell. And that was the end of the Dacke War, that counts as the largest peasant uprising in Nordic history. Yeah. Well, that's all for this week. Subscribe if you want to make sure not to miss out on next week's episode of Fairytales and Legends. Good night.